Welcome to We the People, a Bradley Speaker Series. I'm Rick Graber, president of the Bradley Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us. 2 years ago, the United States Supreme Court ruled that government unions could no longer force employees to pay dues. Despite that landmark decision, many unions have done all they can to make it as difficult as possible for employees to stop paying those dues. With me to discuss strategies to enforce this ruling and protect the rights of workers are Patrick Hughes and Mark Janus. Pat's the president and co-founder of the Liberty Justice Center. He was a lead strategist in the 2018 U.S. Supreme Court case Janus v. AFSCME, which the Washington Post called at the time the biggest labor case of the century. Mark is a senior fellow at the Liberty Justice Center, where he serves as an advocate and spokesperson for workers' rights and workplace freedom. As a child support specialist for the Illinois state government, Mark very courageously took on public employee unions as the lead plaintiff in Janus v. AFSCME and has never looked back. Welcome, Pat and Mark. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. Mark, let's start with you. What motivated you to challenge government unions and essentially become the face of workers' rights? And certainly your life hasn't been the same since.
Well, no, not since the case, no. Well, in 2007, I began work in state government, as you said, as a child support specialist. And it was when I received my first paycheck that I saw this line item in the deductions that said union dues. Now, I started asking around, and I very soon learned that Illinois politicians had granted government unions the ability to deduct money from almost every state worker's paycheck, even if they were not a union member. I mean, during the HR process, I never signed a union pledge card. I never agreed to join the union, and no one ever asked me whether I wanted to join the union. And I just didn't want to pay a political organization such as AFSCME in order to do my job. And nobody asked me if I wanted to. But because Illinois did not have a right to work law, that's what I was forced to do. So every year, I was required to give AFSCME, one of the most powerful and political government unions in the country, hundreds of dollars just so I could keep my job. So year after year and week after week, I watched the dollar just come off my paycheck. And finally, my frustration reached a boiling point when the union threatened strike if the state didn't hand over $3 billion, and yes, that's with a B, in higher wages and benefits. I mean, I just knew I had to do something. So I met the folks at Liberty Justice Center, learned that they were a public interest law firm and that they fight for individual liberties and constitutional rights. When I started talking to them, I realized that, they could help me. So I asked Liberty Justice Center to file my case in the spring of 2015, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And of course, as they say, the rest is history.
Amazing. Pat, the Janus case, without question, was a tremendous victory, but your work is far from over, and I think we knew that at the time of the decision. But give us some examples of how unions are trying to circumvent the decision.
Yeah, Rick, it's a major decision, but the left and particularly public sector unions never stop. They never stop. So they're evaluating the decision and what they can do to prevent its implementation. The first thing they do is they prevent people who want to leave the union, who are in the union, particularly pre-Janus, from leaving. They keep them in under these long contractual time periods. And so we're litigating in places all across the country to try to get people out from underneath those obstreperous and we think in many cases unconstitutional timeframes. The other thing that they do is when someone is hired as a new hire as a government employee, think of a new school teacher in a public school, they're immediately, in almost every case, trotted over to the union for the union's pitch. And they end up joining the union without knowing that they have Janus rights, without knowing that they don't have to participate in the union and that there's nothing the union can actually do to them if they don't. But because the union has sort of a monopoly on that new hire process, a lot of people are joining the union without knowing their rights. And frankly, when they don't want to. We at Liberty Justice Center did a survey, and we learned that more than 50% of public sector workers have no idea what their Janus rights are. And so those are two ways that the unions keep control over current people that are under their union membership, and to bring in new workers. And as you know, the more new people they bring in, the more dues they get. And the more dues they get, the more they can give to politics. The more they can give to politics, the more control they have over the lives of the people in this country.
Pat, I know that the Liberty Justice Center is undertaking educational efforts to make government employees more aware of their rights. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So, Rick, the main way to do this is, as I just indicated, people don't know what their constitutional rights are. And something as specific as Janus, it's hard to imagine why someone just, trying to do their job, raise their family, live their life, would be required to know that on their own. And so we think that it should be a requirement in this country, because of the overwhelming power that the government and the union has over these individual workers, that when they are hired for a public sector job, again, I'll use the new teacher as an example, 22-year-old person coming out of college, they don't understand their constitutional rights. We think it should be a requirement across this country that they're informed of their rights right then, that they're told what their Janus rights are, and that nothing can happen to them negatively as a matter of law if they decide they don't want to join the union, that they don't have to pay into the union if they don't want to. And in fact, Rick, we have cases. We filed a case in Minnesota that we successfully settled on that basis. We have a case in Illinois in the district court currently that'll ultimately get to the Seventh Circuit, where we want to make Janus rights like Miranda rights, where the government is required to tell you these are what your rights are. And once you know what your rights are under the Janus decision, then you can affirmatively consent to either be or not be in the union. And we think that if that were the law of the land, everyone would know their rights, and then the unions would have to really convince people that joining the union was to their benefit.
Makes great sense. Mark, the Supreme Court recently decided that they wouldn't hear your case to recover the union fees that you paid prior to the successful case 2 years ago. Yet, as I understand it, the Liberty Justice Center has filed cases in other states in the hopes of recovering fees for other government workers. Do these cases stand a chance?
Well, Rick, obviously I was very disappointed that the Supreme Court wouldn't take my second case any further. But actually, I'm very much inspired by the dozens of other government workers and employees that have stood up against the public sector unions and filed cases across the country in their quest to recoup these dues paid against their will. And I'd like to quote the Supreme Court decision, if I may, and it basically is very, very simple. It says, and I quote, "Accordingly, neither an agency fee nor any other form of payment to a public sector union may be deducted from an employee, nor may any other attempt be made to collect such a payment unless the employee affirmatively consents to pay." I mean, it's pretty clear in my mind.
Language is clear.
I mean, I'm not an attorney, but the thought of that, when I filed my case, I thought I was in the minority. But I soon learned, after the case was settled and the decision was made, that I learned there were many, many others across the country that felt the same way I did. And I think my case opened the floodgates because it allowed other public sector employees like myself to stand up to their union and fight for their First Amendment rights. And if we don't defend our rights, we'll certainly lose them. And so that is why this case, I think, is so important, and why we have to keep striving, as Pat said.
Absolutely. Pat, I know that the Liberty Justice Center has taken on other high-profile cases recently, including suing teachers' unions that are making it impossible for kids to return to in-person instruction. Do you think COVID somehow, some way has allowed people to better understand the incredible influence, negative influence that unions have over public education systems?
Rick, I do. I definitely do. I think, in sort of politics and policy, informing the public is a very difficult thing because you're competing with a lot of other things out there for their attention. Like I said, most American folks are, living their lives, working, trying to make a better life for their family, and politics and policy only creeps in around election time. What COVID has done is it has sort of brought these issues to the forefront, where it's sort of endemic to their daily lives, particularly if you have public school children. And I think what people sort of in the public school system are recognizing when their kids don't go back to school, and you're seeing sort of record amounts of depression and anxiety and, God forbid, suicide attempts and other things, that the teachers union has tremendous power over the outcome of their lives. And secondarily, that the teachers union doesn't really care about the outcome of their lives, that they're first and foremost concerned with their own sinecures, whether it's salaries, whether it's benefits, whether it's ease of work through virtual learning. And that has given us all a wide opening to expose how powerful and how, in so many cases, detrimental these groups are. And so that's a sort of a silver lining to a very dark cloud. But we can't let that rest. We've got to, for lack of a better term, use that, or I don't want to use the term exploit, but use that to our advantage to make sure people are aware of just how powerful these groups are and how detrimental they can be.
Last question for both of you. What lessons have we learned from the Janus case, and what's next? What are the near-term goals for this effort? Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think the long-term goal is, like Pat just stated, is we have to, defend our First Amendment rights, and that would be the freedom of speech and freedom of association. I mean, my case was all based on the fact that I did not want to associate with a union that forced me into something that I didn't like. And I think one of the things we have to overcome here very, very shortly, is this idea of exclusive representation. And I think Pat can explain it much better than I can. But I think we just have to continue the fight, let people know what their rights are. And fortunately, I think it's going to take a while, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Rick, I think for me, the thing that I've learned the most is Janus was a watershed moment in history. It was one of the biggest cases of the last 50 years at the Supreme Court. And it was a major victory for the way we think and what we believe in. But it didn't stop Portland or Minneapolis or Kenosha from burning. And it isn't stopping cancel culture and calling people out. And in my view, the left never stops moving forward. It looked at Janus, it took stock of Janus, and it reacted. And it's incumbent upon all of us in all of these issues, whether it's a cancel culture issue or a labor issue or whatever the issue is, to fight back as hard as they have fought back. Because even though this was a tremendous victory, Mark is a tremendous patriot, it just was one more moment that needs to continue to be executed going forward. And I think that's what I've learned most, that the fight continues and that we all have to be prepared for it.
Pat and Mark, thanks for your courage. Thanks for your dedication to this cause on behalf of public sector workers all over the country. And thanks so much for spending some time with us today. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us on this episode of We the People.